Good evening, everyone, and welcome to talk about the hard stuff, becoming your children's sexuality educator. My name is Lea R Cortez. I'm a sexuality educator and the owner of LRC Sexuality Education. And a little bit about myself is that I have spent well over 15 years working with children, youth, and families in various settings, and especially specializing with individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities or people who are neurodiverse. And I myself am a mom. And so some of the stories and examples that you're going to hear tonight are from both my professional and my personal experiences. So our working agreement, in order to just create a more safe space, I ask that you be respectful of each other's thoughts and opinions, share or participate when and where you feel comfortable, practice self-care, and have fun. My goals and objectives is that you'll be exposed to topics related to sexuality. You'll examine your own personal beliefs related to sexuality, explore different ways to have age-appropriate discussions about sexuality. And then by the end of this presentation, that you'll have a better understanding of the term sexuality and its different dimensions. Also, for you to build your understanding of age-appropriate discussion by topics and by looking at sexual growth, development, and understanding across the lifespan. Some objectives is that I would like you to be able to describe the psychological, biological, and social cultural aspects of sexuality, looking at those different dimensions, and that you'll be able to identify 2 or 3 personal values you have related to sexuality, that you'll be able to practice the scoreboard method, and that you'll recognize discussion methods that you feel comfortable using, like videos or utilizing guides, etc. So understanding sexuality. So how would you describe sexuality? If you would, go ahead and type that into the chat. Right, so I see some great ideas here. Sexuality is related to someone's orientation, who they're attracted to, it's sexual health, it's sex education. And so these are all these nice, beautiful parts of sexuality, but altogether, they're actually all the same. They're all different parts of sexuality. So what is sexuality? So I took this from Elevator's training. They work with self-advocates who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, and this is how they describe sexuality. They say sexuality means more than intercourse or sex. It's about intimacy, connection, and belonging. It's about relationships, whether it's friendships or sexual. It's about how you feel about being the gender you are, right? The gender identity, sexual orientation. It's about how we feel about others and ourselves. It's about sexual expression and behavior. And it's the total of who we are, what we believe, what we feel, and how we respond. So I really love how they broke it down, because it really is all these different parts and pieces. When we look at the sexuality wheel that comes from teaching sexual health in Canada, they give us this beautiful reminder that sexuality is this combination of who we are by nature and who we learn to be. So if we look at this wheel, we see that right at the very top and bottom, right, these intersecting spots, it's our values, it's our experiences, it's our personality, relationships, gender identity, sexual activity, communication, gender expression, sexual orientation, socialization, biological sex, and self-image. And all these beautiful things come together to help us understand who we are as a sexual being. And we are all sexual beings from the moment that we are born, where we grow throughout our whole life and develop all these different sexual characteristics and things. We're going to dive into that deeper in a little bit. But all these things come together to help us understand our sexuality. And so Greenberg, Bruces, and Oswald break human sexuality down to 3 dimensions, right? They say that a part of your total personality, it involves the interrelationship of biological, psychological, and social cultural dimensions. So we see that very much so in that sexuality wheel. It's this combination of all these 3 parts. So when we talk about the biological, so this is our basic understanding of our sexuality on the physical level, right? Our physical sexual health, how our body works, understanding of why our body does what it does. It is that growth and development physically. It's that understanding of your physical appearance, your self-image, etc. Going through puberty. And then you go down to the psychological. So the psychological goes beyond just sexual activity, but it also involves that sense of being, who we are as a person, our understanding of ourselves, our body image. And it's important, especially for our psychological health and connection to sexual health, is that we have a positive body image. Because if we have a poor body image, that impacts our self-esteem and our overall mental health. And I love here too how the authors highlight that this aspect is also the learned aspects of sexuality. All behavior is learned. And so the psychological is really encompassing of all these different things as well. And I also want to point out here that they say a major psychological fact that affects our sexual wellness is body image. Again, that having that positive body image, that outlook of yourself is so important. Social cultural, this is a combination of our cultural and societal influences, right? This is your religion, this is your family, your friends, social media, all these different things that impact and help give us ideas about what it is to be sexy, what it is to be beautiful, what does it mean to be a sexual being, all these different ideas that help us understand sexuality in ourselves. So really quick, I want you to hop on with me to Mentimeter and tell me a little bit about who taught you about sexuality. So that'd be sexual health, healthy relationships, sex, puberty, etc. And just rank the resources. But thank you all for sharing. So in another talk that I've done similar to this one, I asked, who taught you about sexual health and relationships? Who did you learn most from? And as you see, some people in this particular talk ranked internet and other resources as their number one. Parents came second, friends were third, school, siblings, and then other trusted adults. And another talk, friends came first, then school, and then parents, and not so much the other resources. And the reason why I show these is because depending on how you grew up and what influenced you based on those three dimensions that we were talking about, you may or may not feel comfortable talking about sexuality. And that's why we're here tonight, to learn about how do we talk about the harder topics, but also why it's so important for us as parents, as caregivers, as educators to actually talk about sometimes these really tough subjects that we don't necessarily always want to be touching on. In this world where our kids have access to the internet and so many different things, and while it's good, it can also be bad because we don't want our kids to have any misinformation. So I grew up here in Illinois, and in 2021, there's this great Medical Watch segment that was on the news. And as you'll see, it's a mom talking about why she talks about sex and other things with her child and why it's so important. And you'll hear about one of the leading educators here in Illinois when it comes to educating students, but also helping parents.
On the Medical Watch, who's teaching your kids about sex? As soon as you hand your child a smartphone or other digital device, it begins. The potential to seek out and receive a wide range of sexual content. How can parents get ahead of the curve when it comes to educating their kids? Experts say it's an old lesson. Start talking.
Kids are curious, and that is normal.
Katie Gallagher is the Director of Education at Candor. The organization, formerly known as the Robert Crown Center, has been teaching Chicagoland kids and teens about drugs and sex for nearly 50 years. Times have changed.
It's happening younger and younger.
In their latest research, Candor health educators found when it comes to teens and sexting, 1 in 4 13 to 17-year-olds are receiving sexts, and about 1 in 7 are sending them. Among even younger groups, the average age is 11 for kids to encounter pornography.
So that's average. And so often students and kids as young as 8, 9 are either receiving from a friend, something that's been sent to them, pornographic material that's been sent to them. They stumble upon it on accident while they're looking something up online. Parents really need to recognize that kids are going to come across this content.
The key is getting ahead of the exposure. For Laura Burns and her daughter, the conversation started early.
She said that, like, you could talk to me about anything, and then after that, I'm like, okay, I feel a lot better about that.
Katie is 11.
Katie and I have always been very open with one another, and a few years ago, we started edging towards the puberty conversation, body changes. The more challenging conversations have crept up in the last few years.
Between school and violin practice, the active 6th grader, like most of her peers, is also starting to navigate the digital world.
I have an iPad and a laptop that I got for Christmas last year.
I feel like I have to come at it from a few different angles. There's what I'm going to teach her at home. There's what the school is going to offer by way of an actual curriculum. And then there's everything else. There's friends, peers, the internet.
Parents and caregivers aren't alone. Candor provides online resources to help adults frame the discussion. What is a healthy relationship? What is consent? What is healthy communication?
My tip would be to always start, especially with younger kids, about, well, what have you seen? What do you know about sexting, for example? Have you ever heard that word? What do they know? And then build from there.
I did feel that she was ready when she showed an interest in something. I never held back. So that told me, hey mom, I'm ready to learn a little bit more and I can handle it. It's so important that no matter how scared or uncomfortable you might be, they need you. They need their parents.
And sex education curriculum varies throughout the state, and that's why Candor experts say it's imperative to have conversations at home so you as parents can control the message.
I love how that closes out, right? That you as the parent, you as the caregiver can help control the message. You know, oftentimes I think parents misunderstand, especially when they get teenagers, right? To the teen years, their kid doesn't care about what they think or what they have to say. And that's quite on the contrary. Your children care. They want to know what you have to say. And in fact, studies show that most of the time, our children are making, and teens as well, they're making their decisions based off of what their parents have taught them, what they know, right? Because they're not just going to be learning from us. They're going to be learning from school. They're going to be learning from friends. And I know I can speak that I learned more from school and from older siblings and friends when it came to sexuality, because my parents weren't comfortable talking about certain topics, or they weren't comfortable talking to me about stuff till I got to a certain age, right? My parents felt very comfortable, very open, a little too open sometimes. When it came to, I was a young adult, I was in my 20s. But for some individuals, that might be too late to start talking about having safe sex and healthy relationships. But we've got to start having these talks sooner. And there is no right or wrong age. It's important we just start talking. And just like we saw with this mom, you know, as her child started bringing things up, that's kind of what you can do. And one of the big important aspects I want to bring up is being sex positive. And some of you may or may not have heard of this term, but sex positive parenting. And this is as it's described by Shaman John. And the term sex positive says refers to having a positive attitude about sex and feeling comfortable with one's own sexual identity, as well with the sexual behaviors of others. So when we think of sex positive, right, it's just being comfortable with the topic, but also comfortable enough with ourselves. And when we have this sex positive thinking, then we can translate that into sex positive parenting, where she says involves engaging in healthy conversations about sex and sexuality with our children while celebrating individual differences and normalizing the vast uniqueness of human sexuality. This parenting style is effective effective as it serves to support children's sexuality and sexual identity by acknowledging that our children are innately sexual beings who will be if they are not already curious about sexuality. And I love that she highlights that. If they are not already curious, right, they will be. And most of our kids are curious. So what are some things to keep in mind? When our kids come up to us with these questions, and they're going to come out of the woodwork. Believe me, my children are 5 and 8, and I've gotten some interesting questions, even when they were smaller, and even before I became a sexuality educator. But we have to remember, we want to be our children's number one resource for information, right? As I said, technology is great, but that also means regardless of our children's age, they're going to have access to an endless amount of information. And we want to make sure that it is sound information that's medically accurate, right? We want to be able to help them sift between the good and the not so helpful or the bad misinformation that can exist. And we need to identify and recognize what our values are in sexuality and the topics related to healthy relationships and sexual health. Why? Because we are the ones who are going to impart that knowledge to our kids. They are going to learn it in school. And when she had mentioned the differences in states, here's some statistics. Only 39 out of 50 states in the United States currently require sex education. And out of those 39, when it comes to students who are in the special education sector, only 6 states require it. And then it's left up to the teachers in those 6 states. So whether you have a student who has special needs or a student who is in your typical classrooms, what they learn is going to vary, and the curriculum is going to greatly vary. So it becomes super imperative for parents to know what's being taught at school, whether public or private, or even in homeschooling curriculums, so that you can fill in what you really feel your child needs to learn, whether it be religious or cultural beliefs, that your child knows about that, right? So important that we're sharing our values, because our kids want to know, and they need to know that they can come to you. And it's so important for you to also recognize that how you respond when these questions come up will impact if your child's going to come back to you in the future. So I want people to think about this, right? Think of a time when you've had to go to a boss or to a manager, any supervisor, or even a teacher about a question. And if they responded harshly, right, or even your own parents, and they brushed it off, did you go back to that person? Probably not, right? Especially if they responded in a harsh or uncaring or just negative way, the likelihood of you going to that person dropped. Versus when you had someone who responded in a positive or caring or comforting or supportive way, you went back to that person, right? We all have those people in our life that we know we can count on and we can talk to, because they're not going to judge us. They're going to hear us out and actually try to help us find a solution or answer to our question that we have. And that's what we want with our kids. We want to create that safe space and that loving space. And we have to remember that children are naturally curious about their bodies, sexuality, and the world around them. Children and youth are sexual beings too. From our, again, beginning of our life to the end, we are sexual beings. Sexual growth and development takes place across the lifespan. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. And our discussions about sexuality, sexual health, and relationships is never a one and done deal. So know that. It's a continuous education throughout our lives for both ourselves and our children alike. Right? They're curious about people's bodies and their differences. They recognize these things from the beginning. They want to understand the what, the how, and the why. Right? They're so curious about, why does this do this? How does that work? And know that having unexpected erections are normal and can happen before puberty years. So if you have a child with a penis that is younger than the age of 9, it is not uncommon for them to have erections. That often comes up in my work. And so does masturbation or touching their body. That is also something that happens before puberty years. And both of those things are not just subject to puberty, and they're not just subject to adult years. That's a huge misconception. And that's why I place that here so that you understand that. And remember, your child is watching you, their peers, and their other family members. And they're going to learn from those. And they're also going to learn from technology. As a parent, you teach your child about sexual health, not just sex. Sexual health includes things like hygiene, healthy relationships, sexuality, and consent. This is a beautiful quote coming from Teaching Sexual Health in Canada. So let's pause for a moment. Let's backtrack and think about, what does it need to be sexually healthy? The World Health Organization says sexual health is defined as a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being related to sexuality. Sexual health requires the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences free of coercion, discrimination, and violence. And this definition was groundbreaking because it was finally a definition that included pleasure. And that in itself, altogether, is a whole new topic that we could talk about for hours. But I love this definition because it reminds us, just like the sexuality wheel, just like those other dimensions that we talked about, that it's all encompassing, right? Sexually, to be healthy, sexuality, to be a healthy sexual being. We need all those things in order. So here are some other big questions that often come up in my work. And one is, if I have a child with special needs, do they need to learn about sexual health and sexuality? And the answer is yes. 100% yes. Sadly, individuals with disabilities are much greater risk for sexual abuse and just other heartbreaking things compared to their peers who are neurotypical or who don't have disabilities, sadly. And so they too need education as a preventative measure, but also just for their sexual health, right? For their educational needs, they too need it. Is there a right or wrong age to start talking to my child about sexuality? Child experts say no. It's a matter of having age-appropriate discussions and, figuring out what your kid needs to know at that time based on that question and really responding in a sex-positive way. But there is no right or wrong age. So let's talk about sexual growth and development across the lifespan. We're going to do a crash course of what it looks like throughout our lives. So from birth to 3 years old, biologically, like we're going to examine those 3 dimensions. They're discovering their bodies. They're building their body and their spatial awareness, right? Think of a little baby who discovers they have a hand and that they have a foot, right? It's the most beautiful and funniest realization that I've ever seen any of my own children or my nieces and nephews have. And then children begin to potty train between ages 18 months to 3 years. They're starting to learn anatomical names. They're learning about bodily functions and which parts are private when they're this little. Psychologically, they start to learn about consent, right? They learn that they can say no, and that's their favorite word for a long time. And then they learn how to say yes and maybe, or I don't know. But they learn to say no first. And they're also observing and beginning to be given messages about gender roles and identities. They're building an understanding of feelings and emotional regulation. Social culturally, children observing their family relationships and bond. From infancy, a child is learning to build trust, love, and connection through intimacy with their parent or caregiver. So intimacy in the sense of connection. Oftentimes, intimacy is thought of in a sexual way as an adult understanding, but intimacy applies across our whole life in a sense of connection. So our children, from when they're babies and bigger as they age into toddler years, are really learning how to connect with others through watching what we model, what their family and other caregivers and parents model to them. And their main understanding of relationships is family. And they eventually, as they get into their toddler years, start to identify, that's a friend. And we get to age 4 through 8, biologically, they're still naturally curious about others' bodies, but they're starting to notice the differences, right? I'll never forget when my daughter realized that she had a vagina. She didn't say vagina, she said vagina, and that her brother had a penis. Right? She started to recognize that. She said, you got boobies, I have boobies. So they're starting to recognize those things and identifying it in themselves. And typically around age 5, they are fully potty trained. They start to learn how to care for themselves. So this is when we start introducing those daily living skills, right? Brushing your teeth, dressing, their self-care. Those are all part of their sexual growth and development. Understanding how to take care of their bodies. And again, as I said, they understand who has what, and those with a penis may have unexpected or unwanted erections around this age group, especially as they age towards 8 and higher, where puberty kicks in. Psychologically, again, they recognize the differences between genders. They have understanding of gender identity, gender roles. They can tell you what gender they identify as. They have an understanding of the different biological sexes. They may have crushes at this age. They recognize personality traits. They have their self-confidence and self-esteem is being built, and they're building their independence. Social culturally, their understanding of relationship expands to include friendships. So now they have a better idea of what a friend is, which why talking about healthy relationships is so important. Even at this young age, that they understand, hey, that kid's bullying me, right? And they're still learning about relationship norms, and what's modeled to them is what they're going to learn. They're learning how to interact and connect now from family and peers, and they begin to understand what a bully is, and they learn about identifying who's a stranger and who is not, right? Who's their family member. As we go into ages 9 and 12, biologically, the onset of puberty, right? So another sexual growth development milestone. Girls or those with a vulva may have puberty onset as early as 8 years old and sometimes sooner. They are continuing to build on their hygiene and self-care. Those with a penis may experience unexpected or unwanted erections. Masturbation, sexual feelings may arise, especially as people go through puberty or begin puberty. And for boys, puberty can onset, or those with a penis may onset around age 9 to 11. Here they also have basic understanding of how their body grows, right? They're learning this in science in school, that as they grow, their body changes. And so this is a great time, right around 8, 7, 9, you start talking about, hey, puberty is going to kick in, and this is why it happens. This is what's going on, right? So they begin to learn more about reproduction, and they might have more questions too about talking about sex around this age will be important. And as you'll see, what we talk about with this age group versus our smaller age group and our bigger, older age groups will be very different. Psychologically, they understand who they are, personality traits, gender identity, biological sex. They're continuing to learn about consent and autonomy, that they can say no to people being in their personal spaces. They're building self-confidence and self-esteem. So especially as puberty kicks in, we might see, waves of emotion. And so it'll be really important to check in with our kids, especially if we have any mental or emotional concerns, just to really check in with them, make sure they're okay. And some children may develop crushes. It's not unusual as well for sexual feelings to start arise because the puberty is kicked in and it's starting to get into full swing, and they may become moody or emotional during this time due to the hormones. Social culturally, their understanding of relationships expands to include friendships, but possibly even romantic relationships. Messages on sexuality, relationships, and more will come from friends, peers, and family. And by this time, they have a clear understanding of what a bully is, what bullying, and what is so strangers. Ages 13 to 18, Puberty by this time is typically in full swing, and when puberty begins and ends varies per child. Their understanding of self-care continues to build. By this time, they're pretty independent, with most of their care. And so hygiene will be a super important thing to highlight between ages 9 to 18. Really, really talking about hygiene, taking good care of yourself. Masturbation, sexual feelings may arise. So it's going to be even more so important as they bridge into high school, middle school, that we're talking about sex and safe sex and the choices that they make. And they really build their understandings of reproduction, and their understanding of sex is much, much deeper here. By the time they're in 6th grade, normally to middle school, they're talking about that sex makes a baby, right? They're really getting to the nitty gritty of what sex is, especially in high school. Sex ed goes much deeper. They're going to have to talk. And around this time, if you know conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS, endometriosis exists in your family, know that it may onset as early as this age. I know for me, I have polycystic ovarian syndrome. PCOS definitely hit me as soon as puberty onset. And for me, puberty onset pretty early. And it's important to know your family's sexual health history. And especially with sexual health exams, like testicular exams, breast exams, they're able to start learning how to do these things. Psychologically, they may go through an identity crisis. This is not uncommon. I remember experiencing this because they're learning about who they are. And they're continuing to learn about consent and autonomy. They're building their understanding of consent and how that applies to sexual acts. That is so, so important. No means no, whether it's a sexual contact or to someone being in your personal space with a high five or a hug. It's so important that we give them that space to do so. They're building their self-confidence and their self-esteem. So again, continue to check in with them is important. By this age, they have developed their own worldview based on their life experiences. And some of the children may develop crushes. Again, sexual feelings are unusual, but now they're also getting to the age of where they're really starting to learn how to handle those sexual feelings. We're going to talk about that. And they may still be experiencing moodiness. And some may even experience depression. So it's so important that we're checking in with them. Their understandings of relationships, not only look at social or cultural, they have the understanding of friendships. They may even have romantic partners. And family is still important, but it's not on their priority list at this time. Their friends tend to be a little more important, but don't worry. You come back into their world. And they receive messages about relationships and sexuality from all parts of their life. And it's not unusual for teens to explore pornography or sexting. And this is both really important topics that we talk about, especially when we talk about the legality, especially with sexting. If you don't know what sexting is basically individuals sometimes sending nude photos to each other or sexually explicit conversations with somebody. When it comes to individuals between 13 to 18, that's considered like child pornography if they're sending nude pictures to each other. So that has some legal results. Except, and not just looking at pornography and they're not old enough to look at that. So it's super important to talk about that topic, and as well as being safe. Because once you put it out there, it is forever out there. So when we look at young adulthood, 18 plus, biologically, they are fully sexually mature. Reproduction is 100% possible, right? Even in our teen years, reproduction is possible. And masturbation and sexual feelings may rise. You have basic hygiene skills here. You're pretty independent with that. And maybe knowledgeable about basics of sex and reproduction. I say maybe because it depends on where you grew up. on what you learned. Psychologically, the meaning of consent goes beyond personal boundaries to really include sexual consent at this point. They have a good sense of self, and they may still be discovering themselves. They may still be working on self-esteem and confidence. I know I didn't have myself solidified till I was 22 because of the different traumas I had experienced. They have clear worldviews, again, formed by this age, especially from the life experiences they've had. They may have a clear understanding of their gender identity and sexual orientation. It's not unusual for this age group to really be exploring still, and they're independent. Social culturally, they understand all types of relationships, but our relationships now include professional, acquaintances, family, friends, close friends, romantic partners. We have a real big in-depth understanding, and they may or not want to have children or get married, and that's totally okay. And they have their own expectations about relationships and life goals. So some topics to cover regardless of age group. As we see, sexual development happens across the lifespan, and it's never a one and done deal, right? So if we're talking about, hygiene when they're 2, it continues the rest of their life, and we just keep building and building and building. But no, regardless of age, we want to be using anatomical names for their body parts, and part of that is for sexual abuse prevention, because unfortunately, when it comes to sexual abuse, abusers don't use anatomical names. They use pet names. But it's also important just for educationally. They should know what their parts are called, the medical names. They're not bad words, I promise. They're not bad. And when I worked in group homes, the importance of using anatomical names came up in a very sad way. We had someone who had experienced sexual abuse, but said someone had touched her cookies. And someone kept touching her cookies. And because most of us, as group home parents, didn't know that she had these nicknames for her body parts, the first person she told just assumed that someone was touching her cookies that she eats. And I was like, it's okay to share. No, it was not okay to share. And once it was discovered that sexual abuse was happening, we were able to correct it. So using anatomical names can be so important. Consent and saying no, right? That they can say, no, I don't want a high five right now, or I need space. It's totally okay. And they need to have that autonomy to do so, right? Teaching them personal space and boundaries. What are good touches versus bad touches? What are parts of your body people should not be asking to see or touch unless it's your doctor or mommy or daddy who have to check you because something might be wrong, right? Taking care of our bodies, hygiene and daily living skills. This is something we build throughout our whole life, but it becomes extra important when our kids are going through those bodily changes, right? Because a BO, body odor, we want them to know how to take good care of themselves. And to talk about how we're going to grow and change, and so will our bodies, right? Especially think about when you're pregnant. Talk about where babies come from and how a woman's body changes when they go through that. Or as we age, right? Our bodies do beautiful, wonderful things, and it changes all the time. Emotional regulation. That is so imperative for our kids. They need to know how to communicate effectively, right? Violence is not the answer for stuff. If we need a mental break, we need to get up and move, that's okay to ask for that, right? So we want to be teaching our kids how to self-advocate and be able to assert themselves in appropriate ways, and healthy relationships. Outside of my work as a sexuality educator, I work for a domestic violence agency. I can't tell you how important it is that our children understand what healthy relationships look like within a family, between friends, and dating relationships, professional relationships, because abuse, no matter what it is not okay. And when we look at the healthy relationship wheel, right, sometimes even in a good relationship, whether it be marriage, etc., the possibility to kind of teeter-totter into unhealthy characteristics can happen. But recognizing that with a friend or a partner, whomever, to move back into a healthy state is super important. But to know what to do when it does get abusive, what supports exist, is even more important. And to be able to raise that red flag will be so important. Another topic that is important to talk about is sexual feelings. So how do we talk about this? This one gets really uncomfortable real quick. But we have to talk about it because it's totally normal and natural, and we all have them. Sexual feelings, right, are not always the reason why someone will have an erection. It's not always the reason why someone will masturbate or touch themselves. And these kind of feelings typically will start to arise during puberty. And it can be scary. I learned from colleagues, especially those who have a penis, that erections too can be scary. And so not knowing how to deal with those types of feelings can be really off-putting. And we don't want that. And so sexual feelings can be described as being attracted to someone you like, feeling aroused, feeling attractive or sexy yourself. Sexual feelings may make you feel like you want to kiss someone. It could be built up sexual tension. Sexual feelings can make you feel like you want to have sex with someone, right? So we've got to then talk about how do we address these sexual feelings when they come up. We can be like the ostrich, where you ignore them, pretend they aren't there. You can feel them, but do nothing about it. Right? How many of us as adults be like, I feel really horny right now? That's okay. We recognized it, acknowledged it, but did nothing about it, right? Because maybe you're in an inappropriate place where you can't do that. You can masturbate or touch yourself. And with that, we have to say in the appropriate space, which should only happen at home, in your privacy of your room, or the privacy of your bathroom at home. Those are the only two places. And that is so, so important. And I've supported different professionals working with children that's the place that we've got to teach. Because touching yourself or having sex anywhere else besides the privacy of your own home or in a private space, like your bedroom, can get really tricky. And can have some legal implications, right? Like we don't want our children to be masturbating at school. So it's important that we talk about, like, hey, if you feel like you need to do that, you do that in the privacy of your bedroom or the bathroom at home. And it's okay to ask for private time. When I worked as a group home parent, we definitely had to teach that to our teens. That was okay to ask for private time. And then the last one, that you can be sexual with another person if they want to be sexual with you, right? So the idea of consent, and that they have the power to decide what to do with these feelings. As we can see, though, especially for this fourth one, it becomes so important to share your beliefs and values around it. And when I did a puberty workshop and we talked about sexual feelings, this one I highlighted was so important to talk about with your parents, right? Because it's so nuanced as far as beliefs. So we now have an idea of the different things that we should be talking about. So how do we talk about these hard talks? And I wanted to share this clip from an expert from parents. This is how do you talk to your kids, especially about sex?
You do need to talk to your kids about sex, because this is not info you want them to get from the playground or from their friends. With your young child, all you have to say is, sex or making love is what it's called when two grown-ups make a baby. The truth of the matter is, if your child gets to be 6 years old and you think he's ready to hear more, you can certainly say to your child, you know, you've never asked me about where a baby comes from, and I'm the one who's going to tell you that, so anytime you want to know, just give a whistle. So in answering the question, what is sex, we say to our older kids, look it, sex or making love is what two adults do when they love each other very deeply. They get together after they've known each other very well, and they hold their bodies together, and they make each other feel very good, and the man puts his penis in the woman's vagina. I know this is the part where you're cringing and saying, oh my God, do I have to say that? The answer is, yeah, you need to say that, because guess what? That's how it happens. One of the things that I can tell you for sure is that when your child comes to you and asks, what is sex? The thing you don't say to them is, we don't talk about those things, or you're too young, or I'm not going to talk to you about it, because that gives the child very clearly the message that there are some questions he can't ask, and that's not the truth.
So I really love how that child expert gave examples of how you would say things very different. And as you can see, how she modeled what you would say to a 2-year-old is so different than what she was telling an 8 to 12-year-old. So when it comes to talking about these hard topics, right, whether it be public versus private places, puberty, sex, it all comes to age appropriateness. And so here are some other additional topics that are important to talk about across the age groups. Public versus private places and behaviors, right? I talked about what masturbation, we make sure they're doing it in a private place. What are public versus private body parts? Consent, anatomical needs, healthy relationships, hygiene and self-care. Talk about self-love. It's so important for our children to know how to love on themselves, right? That they can enjoy the things that make them happy or bring them pleasure. That we talk about what to do when someone makes us feel uncomfortable. That is such an important skill. And about puberty and body changes as you age. Some tips from the sex positive talks to have with kids. I absolutely love Liz Carnegie's book. She gives these 14 tips of how to respond and to set the tone. She says, don't panic. Respond in an affirming way. Get curious with the urge to run. And is it so hard to run? Yes, it is sometimes. Answer the question. Focus on preparing them, not scaring them. I'll say that again. Focus on preparing them, not scaring them. Listen to understand and not to respond. So really trying to figure out, like, oh, why are you so curious? Where did you hear this from? Minimize judgment. Don't act like you know it all. And it's okay to not know it all. I'll give you permission right now to not have the answer. Be honest. Respect their autonomy. Keep an open door. And remember what it was like when you were a kid. Remember what it was like. That's so important. And walk the talk. Model it yourself. Again, they're watching us to begin with. Some other important tips when we think about how do we have these hard talks. Keep it simple, but factual, right? As we saw the expert from Parents say, be real, tell the truth, right? We don't want to be telling them things that aren't true. For example, when my cousin was really little and I was about maybe 12, 13 years old, she asked me where babies came from. Well, I had just went through the sex talk at school, and I knew exactly where babies came from. But I knew that my little cousin at like 5 shouldn't know exactly how babies came from. I panicked. So the thing that I told my cousin was, well, you take a pill, the mommy takes the pill, and then 9 minutes later, the baby shows up. She gets pregnant. And so then I didn't realize my cousin didn't actually go follow up with her parents. She believed it until it was her turn to go to 6th grade and go through the sex talk. And when she remembered what I told her and was appalled, she came back and was like, Aunt Lea, you lied to me. And I was like, what did I lie to you about? So be factual and keep it simple and keep it age appropriate, because they will call you out. They will remember. And for age appropriate information, they need to know what they need to know for their chronological age. Right, so if they're 5, they should know what a 5-year-old needs to know, and information that they should be able to understand based on their maturity. And this is especially important when it comes for a child who has special needs. They still need to learn the same information, and they need to learn the information based on their chronological age and not their mental age. So my second oldest brother, Adam, is autistic, and my brother is a few years older than I am, and he's in his 30s like me. So if I'm going to educate my brother, he needs to know everything that a man in his 30s needs to know about sexuality and sexual health. And versus where his mental age is more of a 15-year-old. I'm not going to teach him what a 15-year-old needs because he's an adult man and he needs to know what he needs to know for his age group. So that's just an example of that. And 3, remember that it's okay not to have all the answers. Because we're not going to have all the answers as a parent or a caregiver as much as we'd like to, as much as society pressures us to have the perfect answers and talks. You don't have to. I give you that permission. So with this, you want to acknowledge your child's question and say you'll get back to them. You know, honey, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. But you know, let me look that up and we'll come back to it and follow through. Follow through on the fact that you're going to come back to it, because again, they will remember that they had a question that you did not answer. So follow through and don't be afraid. Again, like Melissa Carnegie said in her tips, to get curious, learn with them. And you can also use the scoreboard method. So one, with scoreboard method, we want to talk about the physical aspects. What is it? Now, what are the physical aspects to it? What are the social aspects? Is it a private behavior? Are there responsibilities with it? Are there laws? What are the emotional feelings connected to it? Does it feel good? Will it feel uncomfortable? And so for this example, I'm going to give an erection. And feel free to pause and try doing puberty and periods. How would you respond to this using this method? So for erection, an erection is when a person with a penis experiences their penis moving away from the body. Some people may say it looks like it's standing away or standing up, and it becomes hard. It feels stiff. It's a private behavior. Erection is a private behavior. Right? If it happens in an awkward time, you can ignore it, leave it alone, and it'll go away. It may feel good. I have friends with a penis that say it makes you feel like you have to pee, or it might feel really uncomfortable. When you're younger, it can be scary to you, but it's totally normal. It's totally normal. It's okay. Right? So that's how I would describe an erection. And with erections, especially as I had just given my little model, it can be scary, especially for our younger kiddos. So it's important that we talk about how to deal with them when they're unexpected. You can also use visual aids. This is called a social story. And this one in particular is talking about how everyone has private parts. There's other visuals like diagrams, right? So, and there's videos and infographics and social stories again, especially like when I think about putting on a pad. If you're someone who doesn't have a vulva or vagina, but you have a child who does, it's so important to know that there are resources out there to help you explain how to put on a pad. And for you yourself to learn how to put on a pad, or how tampons and things like that work, or even menstrual cups, right? Or that there's all these other options now for taking care of your period, or when you're on your menstrual cycle, or to learn that there are different body shapes and sizes, or how to wash your hands. There's fun educational videos. I absolutely love this one. If you do have a child who has a penis and they're learning about erections or boners, this is a great video by Amaze that you're able to show them. There's also toys, models, and books, and songs. And what's funny is even when I was creating this, I totally forgot, like, oh yeah, there's head, shoulders, knees, and toes. It teaches kids about their bodies. There's the body part song. And for me as an educator, when I was working in therapy with children in their schools, it was so funny and eye-opening to me as a sexuality educator to see how excited preschoolers got over finding books about the human bodies. It just reminded me even more of how curious our kids are of their bodies. And these little kids at the book fair were literally freaking out, like, oh my God, there's a human body book. Come over here. And they're all gathered around this one little book. It was actually this one, the Osborne Complete Book of the Human Body. And we're just in awe of, like, oh my gosh. Or IV uterus. I had colleagues who bought me one and I brought it home. And for my family, it brought up the most beautiful conversation about, one, what a uterus was, but two, that mommies hold their babies quite literally in their heart. Because to my son, the uterus looked like a heart. I told him, well, that's where the baby grows. When a mommy becomes pregnant, that's where the baby hangs out and grows in. And he said, well, it kind of looks like a heart. So mommies hold their baby in their heart. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then to him, the fallopian tubes and the ovaries look like little arms and hands. So he's like, so mom, you were hugging me and my sister while we were in your uterus. Isn't that such a beautiful, sweet, and innocent conversation? So that I share that just so you know that, like, there's even cool toys out there that can help you have these really great discussions. And again, it was very age appropriate. It wasn't over the top. It was factual, but it explained, hey, that's where babies hung out. There's other resources, especially online for preteens and up. There's great books. I own both the Celebrate Your Body and Growing Up Great, and as well as the Sex Positive Talks to Have with Kids. They're all wonderful books. And it comes down to just picking the book that you feel like your kid's going to be attracted to. And never forget, your number one resource as a parent is your doctor. Especially if you have any types of concerns, whether it be mental health or sexual health. If you've noticed that you feel like puberty started too soon or puberty started too late, etc. Or if you know you have health history concerns in your family, like diabetes, high blood pressure, endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, testicular cancer, breast cancer. These are all different things that they can screen for and check out and help you navigate. There's a Maze and Scarlet Team, their Sexuality Resource Center for Parents, healthychildren.org. I adore all these resources and I use them often to create my own content. And there's also great YouTube videos like Sam K Tweens and Teens always has a series on puberty for girls. And there's also Watch Wellcast and other great books. I love that It's Perfectly Normal series, or Let's Talk About Sex, or It's So Amazing, It's Not the Stork. I own all four of these books and they help you frame things at age appropriate levels. And as you see, they tell you the recommended age groups and they it looks like a comic book. I adore it. I absolutely love it. And there's I Am a Boy, I'm a Girl. And as you know, these are just so many. I have a plethora of resources that exist out of there. This is not exhausted. These are some of the ones that I know of. And please feel free to shoot me an email and share some of the ones that you have found. I love expanding my resource list. But I want to close and thank you for being with me with this quote, that parents are the sex educators of their children, whether they do it well or do it badly. Dr. Sol Gordon. It's so important to remember that we just start having these talks, and that's okay to not have the right answers. It's okay to circle back and to research it, go to the library together, Google it together, watch a video together, so that you can create those open lines of discussion, so you can create that connectedness with your child, and so that they know that they can talk to you about these hard topics, because they're topics that they, one, need to know about, It can help with prevention of different types of abuse. It can help with them growing in their ability to take care of themselves. It helps them be a sexually healthy person, regardless of their age. And these are discussions and things you're going to have with them from when they're itty bitty all the way well into adulthood. And I know my parents and I, even in my 30s, still have these talks. And it's kind of flipped. Now I kind of help educate them on them being sexually healthy for their ages. So if you have any questions or you need resources, please feel free to reach out to me at LRE Cortez at LRC Sexuality Education.com, and I'll be happy to help you. Thank you for joining me. Have a good night.